Radio Split Ranch.
Hello and welcome once again to Radio Split Ranch, a monthly visit with the Capital Region's great radio personalities of the past and sometimes present. I'm Warren Garling when I'm not on the radio, and as always, you're listening to an opening theme proudly created by singer-songwriter and great lunch partner Drew Jacobs, whose clever compositions have put smiles on faces of fans at his frequent concerts and listeners of the Dr. Demento radio show. Check out his latest creations at drewjacobs.com. He's open 24 hours a day. My special guest this month is one of the deans of Capital Region Broadcasting who spent 6 decades on the air and is still entertaining us on a weekly podcast and in newspaper columns and books about the history of his hometown. You know the voice, you know the name. Now let's get to know the man. Welcome Bob Cudmore to the Radio Split Ranch. Mr. Cudmore, I am very happy that you made it up the stairs to the Radio Split Ranch. I know that's not easy these days for a lot of us.
That's true. But we got up here. It's well worth the trip.
Well, I hope so. Well, let the audience be the judge of that in the next hour. Okay, yeah. So how have you been? Are you hanging in there?
Well, I'm hanging.
Yeah. I know that you're not supposed to ask this of people, but how old are you now?
I'm 76 going on 77.
Okay.
I always get confused about that. Let me see. Yeah. I was born in 45.
Okay.
My birthday's late in the year, so it was, I was 76 last year. I'll be 77 this November 9th.
Yeah, the fun part about getting old is that you can forget things, and sometimes that means even forgetting your age.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? Yeah. So,
well, I still do a podcast, and
right?
I was doing one the other day, and I do it with my producer and longtime friend Dave Green, and I'll just forget. Like, for example, I might forget your name.
Oh, okay.
And the name I forgot then was, not the most famous person in the world, but sort of a famous person in the genealogy business, and that's Henry Louis Gates Jr.
Oh, sure, I know that name, yeah.
So I was talking, on the podcast, and we just... finally, we just left it in. I mean, it's not an official podcast that runs. We do chit-chats that we put just on the website. And I couldn't remember his name. I had done a podcast about the competing show, which is Who Do You Think You Are?
Exactly.
He doesn't do that.
No, he doesn't do that. He does the one on
it's called
on
Finding
PBS.
Your Roots.
Exactly.
I could say all those things. Finding Your Roots, PBS.
All that came to you.
He has a cane. His nickname is Skippy, but I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
But then finally, Dave took pity on me, and he looked it up on the internet while I was talking and said, "Bob, it's Henry Louis Gates Jr." And then once I hear it, he moves to the front of the line in terms of my remembering things.
Well,
I'll
there
remember
you go.
him for a month or two now.
Sure. Now, and it does help to say it out loud. So just so you know, my name is George. You're laughing, so you know I'm lying.
Well, the thing is, you've changed your name.
I have over the years. Yes.
On radio. Did you ever do another name in addition to Chris Warren?
Well, I started out
yes.
as Jesse James. You remember that story? Yeah. Back when all of us had young American names
right.
on the old WSNY. But we're not here to talk about me, because you did that on your podcast a few years ago when I had my memoir published. Tell me a little bit about Bob Cudmore. Where did he start and where did he grow up?
I grew up in Amsterdam, New York,
which
is a mill town in the Mohawk Valley.
Sure.
Carpet making center, and my father was a carpet weaver. Yeah, and his father was a silk weaver.
Wow.
So I come from a long line of weavers. But had no interest in that, and my father did not probably think I should do that. It was sort of ordained that I would pursue higher things or whatever.
Sure.
Or not that that's a bad job. It's a very skilled job. My father had to run what they call a loom.
Sure.
To weave carpets. They basically don't weave carpet much anymore.
Right.
They tuft it.
Okay.
But you still can weave it. But the loom that he used was called a jacquard loom, named for a French fellow who developed a system of punch cards that that moved depending on how a pattern was set. So it made the pattern show up in the carpet.
There you go. Sure.
Some say that the Jacquard loom was one of the mechanical predecessors of the computer.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, because I remember the first computer that I ever was exposed to was in junior high school. So we're talking 1965 or so. And your whatever you put into the computer came out on a punch card.
Yep.
Or on a tape that had punches in it.
But I've heard pro and con. I talked to a guy who's a historian of carpet making. Don't ask me his name. But he didn't think that was so. But it is complicated, and my father loved talking about it, and which limited, but with limited success with me and my mother, his wife, or my sister, other people who didn't know it. So he really hungered, sort of like we do to get together with old radio people.
Yeah.
He loved talking to
talk the industry.
Carpet people, especially weavers of this particular kind of loom. But they were more identified not by the loom type, but by the kind of carpet they wove, which was called Wilton.
Okay.
So he always used to say, I'm a broken down Wilton carpet weaver. So I'm talking more about my father than about me.
And that's fine, because it kind of gives us a history of, again, your background, but also the fact that back when you were young, Amsterdam was still thriving. I mean, it was a very hustling, bustling town. Back in those days, as compared to what's happened to a lot of those industry towns.
And Amsterdam took an early tumble, and then it just kept getting worse.
Yeah.
Although my understanding is that it's turned around to this extent that the population slightly is starting to grow.
Well, there you go.
Once again, and they've got some really progressive industries there. Sticker Mule.
I've heard of that.
Their ads on
I've seen
TV.
their ads too, yeah.
And there's some other companies that they've got that are new.
Terrific
companies. But and then there's the sort of trove of history, which is what I've been mining for some years along with other people.
Yeah.
Because it's an interesting past.
Yeah.
Where they used to make something, they don't make it anymore, and so on.
Yeah. So when did the radio bug bite you?
I always liked listening to the radio.
Okay.
And unlike, I think, a lot of you guys, or, the guys I meet at the Louis lunches and the other gatherings that we have, I just liked my local radio station, WCSS, up in Amsterdam. It was a station that started in the late 40s, and we listened to it at home, and I listened to it. I mean, as I got to be a teenager, of course, I was into rock and roll, and I wanted to hear the rock and roll on the big stations like WPTR and WTRY.
Yeah.
But I liked the local station, and it was really they're all probably crazy to some extent. I mean, people, there were these real larger-than-life personalities that were at this little radio station. The Polish announcer, Richard Bartizel, who I ended up working with, Walt Gaines, who owned a couple of stations up in the valley, as we call it, and he owned a station in Little Falls. Really an outlandish sort of broadcaster, along the lines of the people that Don Imus made fun of. This is Reverend Billy Saul Hargis.
Right.
Walt Gaines would get on there, and he could sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. But so anyway, I liked listening to local radio, and somewhere along the way, when I was in high school, the station was having auditions for a Sunday announcer.
Alrighty.
Which apparently they had done before. I mean, it wasn't the first. I don't know who was before me as Sunday announcer, but the manager and then ultimately the owner at the time was really a great broadcaster, a guy named Phil Spencer.
Okay.
I probably would have had a different thought when I worked for him. Because he was known, as they all were, for being tighter than the paper on the wall.
Yes. But I found that to be the case. Yeah.
But they had auditions for this position, and I don't know if it's because they weren't invited or because they just didn't want to go. No girls came. It was just the guys.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of us really.
Yeah.
Auditioned. We had to read this, read that, do the other. the other thing, and ad lib or something.
Cool.
And I didn't win.
Okay.
The winner of the competition was a young student a year ahead of me named Steve Ferris.
All right.
And they asked Steve, and he said, I don't want to do it.
Ah, interesting.
And then Steve became a lawyer and did quite well.
So, in other words, Steve was smarter than most everybody else applying for the job.
So I was number 2 on the list. And so to this moment, probably one of my happiest memories of a phone call is a man named Carl Bond, who was the program director and morning man at WCSS.
Cool.
Called me and said, Bob, we'd like you to work on Sundays. Okay.
Yeah, no, I had one of those calls that started my career, and you're right. I mean, there's nothing like it. You remember everything about that moment when it happened to you.
Yeah,
sure. Especially when we were still young and impressionable. You were how old at the time?
16.
16. There you go. Same here with me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy.
Because I was a junior in high school.
Okay. Yeah.
And you were as well.
Same as well. Yep. I had just finished my junior year. In fact, it was the day after our final day of my junior year.
Yeah. I started in 62, and early in the year. So I had a full year of just working Sundays.
Okay.
I may have worked Saturdays too sometimes.
And what were you doing on Sunday afternoons?
Well, I was the announcer.
The next 15 minutes of the Dusty Miller Show is brought to you by some of the stores with the WCSS mic on the door. These progressive merchants displaying our mics offer you quality, value, and service. Remember, for the best buys always, shop at the store with a mic on the door. Save when you shop Southside Supermarket, 56 Bridge Street. Save on prices and save top value stamps too. Now at Southside Supermarket. With your free delivery, your stamps will be delivered too from Southside Supermarket. Now at Ottavio's, the House of Leather, 27 Market Street. The January clearance sale. Big discounts on discontinued Skyway luggage, regular Samsonite, some briefcases, wallets, teenage Italian all-leather bags, and many others too numerous to mention at Ottavio's. And Tessero's Professional Apothecary, 186 Market Street, and Tessero's Pharmacy, 46 East Main Street, 2 stores equipped to give your family double health insurance with quality drugs, cosmetics, and prescription service. Sick room or surgical supplies, and now at the Market Street store, famous Loft chocolates.
On Saturday afternoon, we had maybe a couple of religious shows.
Okay.
I had to get on. We didn't have... I got to meet the Polish and Italian announcers. The station was heavy with ethnic programming.
Yep.
But the show that I did, the English announcing, as they called it, was the Lithuanian Hour.
Oh, wow.
With a man named Leonard Hadwigas. And so I do that 7 to 8. And then it seems to me something else happened, some other recorded show. But then... like around 9 o'clock at night on Sunday till 11 o'clock in the sign-off, and then I did the news.
Okay.
And which at some point I had to gather during the day, and so I got to play music.
There you go. Yeah.
And I bent the needle, or whatever you want to call it, even though I was just saying I hadn't really been a great fan of the rock and roll local stations from Albany or Schenectady. But I wanted to be popular at school.
Okay.
So
Makes
I
sense. Yeah.
started putting in rock and roll music.
Sure.
Much to Phil Spencer's chagrin.
Yeah.
You know?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
And so that was it. So 62, I did that. I don't think I had a summer job in 62. And realized I'm not the... most industrious person. Like a lot of my friends, set pins at a bowling alley. They had paper routes. They worked in factories and so.
Okay, sure.
The only thing I ever did until I ended up one summer when I came home from college, I couldn't get a radio job. I worked for Public Works.
Okay.
But for years, I never did anything except radio.
Yeah, there you go. Pretty much
job.
my story as well. Yeah. I was only working 1 day a week the second summer that I was on the radio, about ready to go off to college. And my mother said, you got to do something else. I mean, you can't just, you're bringing home what? $25 a week. Wouldn't you like to go away to Boston with some money in your pocket? And so she got me a job where she worked, which was at a beverage canning spot.
Okay.
So for about 4 weeks of the summer of 70, I would do that Monday through Friday and then be on the radio on Sunday.
Well, what happened with me is it seemed to me it was just the once a week, or maybe I worked some during the summer, but the second summer I was the regular fill-in. So I did a lot of fill-in. I filled in for everybody, including the morning host, which was always a big
Oh,
deal.
yeah.
Also, they fired the nighttime DJ for reasons they're funny, but I don't know if I want to get into it in that
Whatever.
late stage. But and so they had me do that. But they were looking for somebody because they knew I was going off to college.
Sure.
And same with the summer of my senior year, as I was about to go off to college, I was also in Boston, but this was at Boston University. And I think it was that summer that I kind of, for a time, terminally offended Phil Spencer.
Uh-oh.
I played, too much of that rock and roll.
There you go.
The one story I always tell, and I'm sure I've told you already, is I liked My Boyfriend's Back by the Angels.
Angels, very good.
My boyfriend's back and there's going to be trouble.
Yeah, right.
And I think I was filling in on the morning show, and all of a sudden the studio door opened and Phil's standing there, and he said, "Bob, do you like that record?" I said, "Oh, yes, I do, Mr. Spencer. I like it very much." "Well, take it off the turntable and take it home. I never want to hear it again."
Oh, the good old days.
The good old days.
The good old days. Yep. So you're going off to college, and it's not really, are you going to pursue broadcasting in college, or what was your major going to be?
That was actually probably my hope.
Okay.
But I went to college. I did well in school.
Sure.
I was valedictorian in my class.
Excellent.
And of high school.
High school, sure.
And I tried to get into Harvard, but couldn't.
Okay.
And so I got into what I thought was maybe the next best thing, Boston University.
Certainly right up there, yeah.
It was in the same city as Harvard.
Exactly.
And I was on some sort of waiting list.
Kind of across the river, but we won't go into the semantics.
River. Yeah. Exactly. And they're also well known for having a broadcasting or communications major.
True, yeah.
And at that time and to this day,
absolutely,
they have radio stations.
Right.
So I went there, but I didn't study communication, the electronic communication. I'm an English major.
There you go.
And so I did that. So I had like 2 lives at college. I studied English, right? Took courses in English literature. But I started immediately hanging out at the college radio. They had 2. Yes. They had the closed. I think you talked about it at Graham, where you went.
Right.
Whatever you call it, carrier current.
Carrier current, right? If you could. You had to plug your radio into the power in the building in order to hear the station.
And that was WTBU.
Okay.
And I did a certain number of programs on I think I did a once a week rock and roll DJ show.
Cool.
And then there was WBUR FM.
There you go.
Which today is a huge power in public broadcasting.
Yes.
But back then, it wasn't a joke, but it was just, nobody listened to it. I remember bring my father back in the story. I remember as I did more and more for WBUR, he bought me an FM radio, a nice KLH FM radio.
Wow, yeah.
And so I could listen to myself or other things.
Yeah, because in the 60s, FM was still kind of phenomenal. It was new, and not a lot of people were listening to it. I think my first exposure locally was WRPI, again, a college station, because they were playing the music that I enjoyed, and it was on the FM. Yeah.
Well, see, they hadn't made that leap yet at WBUR.
Okay.
They were still doing basically, not that there's anything wrong with it, the classical music thing.
Okay, yeah.
And sort of serious programming.
Sure.
So I don't know what order or sequence, but I was at BU for 5 years actually, because I got my bachelor's and I got a 1-year master's degree. So I was there for that number of years. And at some point, I started doing a talk show called Conference Call. I mean, we didn't take calls, but we did. I interviewed people.
Okay.
And in fact, I think the one that I had the most fun with, we called Turning the Tables on the Talkers.
Okay.
In fact, I even have a clipping from the Record American or something like that.
Yeah.
WBUR is going to put this blah, blah. And now here's a challenge. I have to remember all their names. But there were 3 of the prominent talk hosts in the Boston market that I interviewed.
Wow.
One was Jim Westover.
Yeah, before
One
my
was
time. I
Fred
think.
Gale.
Okay.
And one was the other Bob Kennedy.
Okay.
So they were all at big stations. Bob Kennedy was at WBEZ.
Okay.
He
Sure.
was on 6:30 to 8 in the evening.
Yeah.
Fred Gale, the kind of liberal one of the bunch, was on, I think it was called WNAC, but it became WRKO.
Yes. Yes.
And Jim Westover, and this is where I'm confused about where this story falls in the story of my life. Jim Westover was a talk host on WEEI, the
Okay.
Talk of Boston.
Yeah.
WEEI, the Talk of. And I had actually worked with him because I don't know when, again, the sequence of it, but I was doing these talk shows at WBUR. We did another big project at WBUR when there was a newspaper strike. By then we had a manager. Last I knew, he was still with us, but having trouble toward the end of his life, as many of us do. But a guy named Will Lewis,
Okay.
and Will hired me to help him with the newspaper of the air.
Okay.
I kind of after it started with the strike. The Boston newspapers went on strike.
So there's nothing in print.
Right. So Will invited all the reporters to come up and read the stories they would have written
Wow.
if they were. So it was a big project. He got a
Sure.
lot of. That was Will. I mean, Will was like, you could see the seeds of all that public radio has done in Will Lewis. And when the strike ended, there was no need for the newspaper of the air.
True.
But he kept it going. And so I ended up, and this was sort of the end of my time at Boston U. I did hosted and produced a 1-hour news show every night,
Cool.
Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
And the story, and I had the occasion to interview Will about his GoFundMe campaign and such. And he remembers me, but it's sort of like, me and Henry Louis Gates. He doesn't remember me well.
Yeah.
And I said, I swear this is true, Will. And he didn't deny it. He said, well, it could have happened that I'm doing this newspaper of the air. How is he going to pay me?
Yeah.
There's no budget
Sure.
for this guy.
Yeah.
So my wife at the time, my first wife, she passed away in 2001. She was a typing teacher at Hickok Secretarial School in Boston.
All right.
So she was a qualified typist.
Sure.
And so I said, or I don't know if I said or Will said, I could pay your wife for doing, I have budget for clerical work. So I think that was it.
Weird.
And I think, remember the salary, I think was $35 a week.
Okay.
So that was probably the best thing I did at WBUR, the most, productive thing. But by then, getting way back to Jim Westover and company, by then, and I'm not exactly sure how I got it, I had a job at WEEI.
Oh, okay.
They needed, again, a Sunday announcer.
There you go.
And it's at the time, I think it still exists. It's a sports talk station, I think now.
Okay.
But
I think so too.
It had been a middle of the road station back in the day, and then kind of went into talk. and ended up being all news, I think, for a time.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
And I was there. Well, no, I wasn't there in the all news phase. I was there in the talk phase.
Okay.
But they did a lot of news.
Sure.
And so I did Saturday and Sunday, late. So it kind of messed up the social life.
Yeah, probably.
But
yeah.
that's what I did. And it was, to me, it was wonderful. I mean, I remember it wasn't even the program director. It was the assistant program director who hired me. He did two things when he hired me. He said, "You can't say you're Bob Cudmore. We don't like that name.
Okay.
I want you to be Bob Collins."
Okay. Yeah.
Sounds Irish.
Yeah.
There's a columnist at the Globe named Bob Collins. Maybe people will think you're him. So that was the only time I had my name changed.
Okay.
And as you, I'm sure, has found out, but at WEEI land, Bob Cudmore didn't exist. It was
There
Collins.
you go. Sure. Yeah.
Bob, what are you doing there, Collins?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but I worked Saturday and Sunday at WEEI, and I was required, although I was happy to do it because I come from a long line of labor activists, I guess you say.
Okay.
My father was a union member.
All right.
I had to join the
the
union.
union. Sure.
The American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, which cost an arm and a leg,
Oh, boy.
but they paid what I thought was an arm and a leg. They paid $3.50 an hour.
Wow. Yeah. That's
And
right
I was
up
used
there.
to making $1.25 an hour.
Exactly. And this is the 60s. Yeah. I mean, when I started in
the
69, I got a $2.25 an hour. You
Yeah.
know, so there you go. Yeah. Being a union member paid off there.
And I had a lot of fun stories at WEEI and some not so fun. Again, I'm on kind of a roll with remembering names. So here's the deal. I did some announcing. I did some news writing, and wrote my own news copy.
Sure.
But I also would produce talk shows.
Good.
Which means answer the phone.
Okay. Yeah.
But we were set up, it was sort of, I remember the engineer I often worked with, a guy named Bobby Cook. Bobby Cook would be to my right at the control board. I'd be at his left at a telephone control board, with switches that fader pots and this and that. So I could, do things and at some point do real producing, say Jim Westover's talking to somebody about the governor, and I, able to reach somebody, the governor's staff, and get him on with
Nice.
Jim before the show.
Nice. Yeah.
Before the show ends.
Yeah.
So I produced a little bit for Jim Westover, and a little bit for another announcer named Howard Nelson, and Bobby Cook and I were there when not Howard Nelson, but the guy he did this once-a-week show with, which was very popular, was unceremoniously yanked from the airwaves.
Uh-oh.
And that was Father Norman O'Connor, I believe.
Okay.
Kind of a left-wing priest. He was the jazz priest.
Okay.
And so, we were going along. It was Sunday afternoon. They were, I don't know who, they were on maybe 3 to 6 or something. So we get to the end, and Howard Nelson turns to Father O'Connor and says, "Father O'Connor, I just want to thank you for all the years we've been together doing this show, but we won't be doing the show anymore.
You just did your last one."
So thank you and goodbye. And the two of them got up, and I don't think they even spoke to us.
Wow.
And they just left the building.
Crazy.
And, of course, the phone lines were humming, and reporters called.
Oh, boy.
And I just tried to, practice my no comment skills. And I think Bobby did as well, but I don't know. But somehow the kind of real story got out that the manager of the station, WEEI, was a conservative Catholic gentleman, and he didn't appreciate some of Father O'Connor's opinions.
Yeah.
And, that's the way the cookie crumbles. But
Sure.
I remember being called in by the same guy that made me Bob Collins. Did you talk to anybody Sunday night from the Globe? And I said, "No, I didn't, sir, honestly."
Yeah, didn't give them any information anyway. Yeah. I think radio producers, tell me if you agree with this, are kind of the unsung heroes, especially of talk radio.
Oh, yeah.
Because they are behind the scenes. Now, a lot of times, and this is happening now at WGY, you do hear the producers.
Right.
They sometimes are a part of the show. But for many years, you wouldn't. They were behind the scenes completely, as you say, answering the phones, figuring if it's a talk show, a phone talk show, they're obviously figuring out which ones go on and which ones don't, you know. Oh, this is George again, and he was on last week 3 times, so we're not going to put him on
every night.
Yeah, there you go, exactly. So, but they really, they would help shape the direction a show would go in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was so different, and I was so different in my whole career as a talk host than guys, like even, I don't know if he's done actual, I guess he has. I was going to bring up Mike Patrick or J.R. Gash at WGY.
Sure.
Or Rush Limbaugh, of course.
Yeah.
But anyway, they were different.
Yeah.
I mean, you knew that Jim Westover was a conservative man.
Okay.
But, he would have the liberal Democratic governor on and talk with him and so forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
But things have changed.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. So you didn't stay in Boston after college?
Well, I hate to tell you, but I have another chapter in the Boston area.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
You don't have to hate to tell me. I'm anxious to hear it.
Well, I don't know what happened to WEEI. I really can't remember. I think it just sort of petered out.
Okay.
So I wasn't doing that anymore. I graduated from Boston U, so I'm not doing that anymore.
Right.
But I and a friend of mine named Ben Farnsworth got jobs at a news station in Boston.
Okay.
That was WCAS.
Okay, I remember it.
An old AM frequency, and we were on the AM side.
Yeah.
7:40 AM, daytimer when we started, and I think it was all the time I was there. And it had decent backing. It was Kaiser Globe Broadcasting.
Ah, okay.
The Kaiser car shipbuilding company, healthcare, up from the West Coast, started a group of radio stations.
Sure.
And they partnered with the Boston Globe.
Okay.
But so that's where we were at. And what their concept was to do a news station that had DJ shows too, but focusing on, I think, 5 communities in the Boston area.
Okay.
Not Boston.
Okay.
Watertown, Cambridge, Arlington, Somerville, and Belmont.
Okay.
And the call letters were WCAS.
Right.
So that's what we did. For maybe I worked there for a year and a half or so. And at some point, WCAS hired this hotshot New York City programmer named Tony Chinamo.
Okay.
And Tony came in and, it's radio. And so we're always goofing around
Sure.
and this and like that. And he liked Ben and I goofing around. So I think that's funny. I think we should have you do a show.
Whoa.
So, sure. And so we had other things to do. I still did the news in the morning. Ben covered Belmont. I covered Somerville.
Okay.
But from 10 to noon, we did the Ben and Bob show or the Bob and Ben show. That was one of our long-standing bits. And we thought we were funny.
And as long as the boss thought you were funny.
Well, and that was the problem.
Oh, okay.
The local people did. I mean, Tony Chinamo thought we were hilarious.
Okay.
And he had enough pull that his boss, the manager, he convinced, who wasn't a radio guy, these guys are great. They're great. So periodically, the head of Kaiser Broadcasting was a man named Dick Block, I believe, would fly around the country and visit the stations. And we had he had 2 stations in Boston. He had JIB, WJIB.
Oh, JIB, sure. I auditioned there once.
Yeah, FM, beautiful music.
Yeah.
Ben Ben's got a great voice, and he ended up doing some announcing over there. But that station was doing great.
Okay.
WCAS, who knew?
Yeah.
Yeah. we used to call our chief salesman Giveaway Smith. So anyway, Dick Block came, listened to the whole thing, and sent a memo to Shaw and Chinamo, the managers there, saying, let me see how this was worded. And eventually, we got a copy of the memo.
Oh, sure.
It was, Dear Don, Ben and Bob, they are just awful. Wouldn't it be better just to get rid of one of those yokels and get a professional on the air?
Wow.
To do a radio show that we can be proud of. So the funny thing was, there was no doubt in anybody's mind that the real genius of Ben and Bob was Ben.
Okay.
I mean, based on his future career. He ended up doing television in New York.
Wow.
He anchored for WCBS FM at CBS, the all-news station in New York.
Wow.
Even before that, came back to Boston. He was at WEEI, but they fired Ben. Didn't fire me.
Wow.
But I started looking.
Sure.
And so then I got a job in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. There was some sort of a family push to that as well. My parents were getting older.
Sure.
My father, I think by then they'd laid him off at the carpet mill. I mean, he was almost retired.
Yeah.
And maybe he was having some health problems. But anyway, I thought, well, it's closer to home. So we went to Pittsfield, Mass. In late 1968.
Okay.
And went to a station called WBEC.
Sure.
And stayed there until 1980 when I went to WGY.
Wow. So what was it like? I mean, were you the big man in a nice, small market? Or?
I was after a time.
Yeah.
I did feel quite rather inadequate when I went there, oddly enough, even though, because the guys at WBEC, the news people, were very good. There were three of us.
Okay.
There was Tom Twynham, who's passed away, who was the news director. Chris Brooks, who ended up working for the Boston Globe.
There you go.
I think he's retired, and me.
Wow.
And we had to do, real news. I mean, we had to get out and cover things and so on and so forth. So they had me do that in addition to doing a phone-in talk show for a half hour in the morning.
Okay.
And as time went on, I sort of morphed into the morning host. The man who I dearly loved, Dana Jones, who'd been the announcer. I sort of pushed him to the side. He ended up working at the FM station of WBEC. At the end of my stay there, I was doing the morning show, and it was a lot of fun, and it was something like maybe what Don Weeks did, although I didn't do voices. I don't know what it was like what Don Weeks did, but I did like interviews, and we did kind of foolish stunts sometimes.
Cool.
And it was quite popular in Pittsfield, and I kept trying toward the end of my stay there, as we got closer to 1980, trying to get a job specifically at WGY. I applied several times.
Wow.
When they lost, and I was always trying to get the morning job again. But that didn't work out. But maybe that helps you eventually, because when they did need somebody to do the nighttime talk show because they'd fired the night host, it's a long story.
It's fine.
I don't know if it's a long story, but it's a sad story. And they fired the night talk host at WGY, and WGY came to me.
There you go.
Mike Neff, who was the program director, drove over to Pittsfield one day.
Sure.
And I get done with my show, and a phone call, okay, and it was Mike Neff.
Wow.
This is Mike Neff. Been listening to the show. We'd like to consider you for the evening talk show.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up going to WGY.
You helped make that happen because they knew the name. They knew that you really wanted to work there, even though the 2 or 3 times that openings came up, they didn't think you fit. but just by being, them being aware of your presence and the fact that you're not that far away, obviously you could listen to the station. You knew what was going on there. So it must have been a pretty easy transition for you.
Well, again, I thought it was hard at the beginning, but I kind of went into the groove of it. And the people were very accepting.
The audience?
Well, not the audience. That was another story. But the folks I work with.
Okay.
Like Walt Fritz.
Sure.
Walt was, sort of an icon there. And he was, specifically, as they say, very kind to me.
As he was to me when I first started in the business. Yeah, kind of guy he is.
And then the others, like Don, it wasn't Don Weeks that when I first went there. It was a guy named John Leslie, but he was sort of out soon. And then Don Weeks came in and got to work with Don Weeks. When Joe Gallagher came there, it was wonderful. He and I really hit it off. And I just enjoyed talking to him and being, part of his show. So practically everybody there, Harry, Harry was like the big star or a big star.
Harry Downey we're talking about.
That's right, Harry Downey.
Yeah.
And Dave Green. Dave Green is doing the all-night show.
Okay.
In fact, I remember that was one of the first things I listened to on WGY after I knew that Mike Neff wants to talk to me. I heard Dave and Peter Reif doing their 11 p.m. crossover.
Okay.
That's a phrase people grasp, going from one show to the other.
Sure.
And they would talk for like 15 minutes, and it was funny as could be.
That's WGY News. I'm Peter Reif. Right now, Contact with Bob Cudmore on 81 WGY.
Happy New Year, Peter.
It's not here yet.
Well, I know, but Happy New Year anyway. I realize we'll have another chance to talk after the 10 o'clock news.
That's
Want
right.
to wish you and your lovely wife a Happy New Year.
And same to you and all the Cudmores.
In fact, we
all
have
48 of them.
We have about 7 of them on the phone now. As we continue with New Year's Eve on Contact, we are mainly doing Talent Night. We've heard from some of our old regulars. Richie had a tremendous set. Johnny from Albany. We've heard from a lot of young voices tonight. Just before the news, we heard from Connie, Kirsten, and Carolyn, who said they've been trying for many of their young years to get through to something on 81 WGY. They finally made it. And they sang Tomorrow. The sun will come out tomorrow.
That's from the old Broadway show, Annie, right?
But anyway, we're probably not going to get you to sing, are we, Peter? I mean, I hate to even sound negative. I mean, I've been giving you such support in these your efforts to continue your trivia role.
I'm sorry. I just can't find it in myself to sing.
Well, one of these nights you will. It'll be
one of these nights.
It'll be no, I
one of these nights.
One of these nights. It'll be like Jim Neighbors on the Gomer Pyle show.
Yeah.
When you open up.
You'll really have to wait for it.
We'll have to wait for it. Well, anyway, Peter, we've got the Cudmores waiting on the line. They're going to do their thing, and then we're going to move on to other Talent Night and New Year's Eve calls. So, Happy New Year.
Same to you, Bob, and I'll be speaking to you later.
Okay.
And the other day, this is a Dave Green story. The other day, Audrey, my wife, was cleaning, and she was listening to country music on Spotify.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, the Statler brothers piped in with Those Were the Days. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And that was Dave Green's Friday night theme for his trivia show.
I'll be darned.
And the premise was he'd ask Peter Reif questions, and most of the time Peter knew the answers. Well, anyway, so everybody was good to me. After I was there 2 or 3 years, that was when WGY was at a high point.
Yes.
1980.
Yep.
And while I was there, it went downhill. There's no other way to look at it.
Yeah.
But so we were losing audience at night.
Oh.
It's eventually people like Tom Likas were on opposite us in the market and other reasons.
Sure.
But we tried to hang in there, and to some extent we did. But after I was there for 3 or 4 years, there was this. It's a big enough station. It's got layers of management. The manager didn't. she thought it's time for Cudmore to go.
Oh.
And supposedly my successor was at the station one night. They brought him around to show him. And then, again, I'm not sure this is exactly true, but, I'm in the union, of course. I joined when I was at WEEI.
Okay.
And one book came out, an Arbitron book.
Ratings book, yeah.
And the station, went down again, except for Cudmore.
Ooh.
And I went up, maybe, not a lot.
Yeah, but enough.
But, it was something to notice.
Yeah.
And I remember Jim Leonard, who was our shop steward, called me to congratulate. Oh, that's good. The one they want to get rid of. It's the one with the best ratings.
Yep. Jim and I went to Burnt Hills
you
together.
Went to school together.
Yep. He was a year ahead of me. And he was, again, one of those guys I looked up to and said, if he can do it, I can do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This song's called Alice's Restaurant. It's about Alice and the restaurant. But Alice's Restaurant is not the name of the restaurant. That's just the name of the song. And that's why I call the song Alice's Restaurant.
Let's begin with Alice Pelkey Brock. 20 years ago this Thanksgiving, Alice and her husband Ray invited one Arlo Guthrie and friend Richard Robbins to Thanksgiving dinner. Alice lived in the deconsecrated church in the Van Duzenville section of Great Barrington, Massachusetts, near Stockbridge, where Alice had her restaurant, off an alley, down Main Street, and also in Stockbridge she worked as librarian at the Stockbridge School. Arlo, the son of folk singer Woody Guthrie and Marjorie Guthrie of New York, attended that school. On that Thanksgiving 20 years ago, the events begin with Arlo and his friend trying to dispose of a whole pile of garbage from Alice's place. Alice Brock, why did you have so much garbage there?
It really wasn't garbage, like smelly fruit skins and stuff like that. It was from renovations. We were working on the building. It was plaster and wood and building paper.
After that, it was a kind of a series, not talking about myself, but I remember at one of our WGY anniversaries, we just observed the 100th. Somebody, we were at the party. I think it was held at Proctor's or so on. And that very day, I think we were still yoked with WRGB television.
Sure.
And that was the day that they let Don Decker go.
Wow.
A longtime news director.
News director, yeah.
Who I knew, again, it was always good to me because we were both Amsterdam boys.
Ah.
And and that meant a lot to Don. Mm-hmm. But so I was just shocked that they let Don go. And I was talking to another former WGY personality, and I said, Terry, let Don go. He said, let me tell you something, young man. I survived 27 palace revolutions in that place. They got me in the 28th, and they'll get you too.
It's true. It's just the nature of the business.
Yeah.
It is. It usually happens after you've been there a while and you're making a decent amount of money,
Yes.
and they realize, gee, I could hire a kid out of high school and he'd take half that pay and be thrilled.
Well, I think I used this story when we did this the last time. I remember...
Now you've given me up.
No,
No, let explain what that means.
No, you don't have
Bob,
to.
Bob, no, I do, because, truth in broadcasting here. If anything, I've always been truthful to my listeners, and that is, Bob was here 3 months ago, and once again, twice in the last year, I accidentally erased the interview. Okay, last time it wasn't my fault. It was the computer.
Of course
Okay,
not.
I replaced the computer and upgraded the software, and everything was fine. This time it was human error, if you can call me that, because I
Yes,
feel
we do.
awful when it happens to me. And Bob wasn't even home yet, and I had to get in touch with him and say, by the way, everything we just did for the last hour, I just erased.
And of course, I thought you were kidding.
Oh, well, yeah. I've been erasing interviews since the Neil Diamond interview of 1972. That's for another whole book sometime. I've done
indeed.
so many crazy things in my career. But anyway, that's the reason why Bob just referred to last time he was here.
And now I can't remember where
Where we were going
story.
with that, because we're two old
Oh, I
guys.
know. I remember. It.
Okay, good.
It was about Palace Revolutions
Yes,
and
yes,
you're
yes.
making too much money.
Yeah.
Shortly before I was let go by WGY in 1993, I believe it was, I was with one of the managers of the new owners. They had new owners,
Happens.
GE owned it for a long time.
long time.
And that, really made it what it was
Sure.
in a sense. But there were a couple of owners, and this guy wasn't the top of that heap, but he was, an important man, and I was stupid to say what I said to him. And he was very much friendly. He'd come in at night, and he'd bring us donuts and so on and so forth. And by then, they'd cut my hours way back,
Right.
something like that.
I remember
And
the
so
story,
I
yeah.
was primarily what they call a board op.
Yeah.
I do
Just-
my 2-hour talk show, and then the Dolans were on. I think they did a financial show.
And you're just running the equipment for them. Yeah.
So I said to Gil, Gil, I'm probably the highest paid board op in America.
Wrong thing to say to a money person. Absolutely, yeah.
You got a point there, Cudmore.
And how long before you were gone?
I know, so then I was gone.
Yeah.
But it led me in other directions. I started writing for newspapers. Did a column for the Troy Record when Rex Smith was editor for some time, and then started doing op-eds for the Daily Gazette. And that's become my media home, if you will.
Back when it was the Schenectady Gazette.
It was the Schenectady Gazette.
Yeah, before
But
changing to
now
daily.
I've done a history column for the Daily Gazette longer than I've ever done anything else.
Yeah. Well, that's where that English background came in. I
Could
mean,
be.
thank goodness you got a
Yeah.
chance to use your education from, Boston University.
Yeah,
But did you have any idea back in those days that would be in your future, that writing would become so important to you?
Well, probably. I thought maybe I could write the great American novel.
Oh,
too,
don't we all think that?
But
yes, yeah.
I didn't. But it's what I found is a little a niche, and I hope this doesn't mess me up with the Gazette like I did with the WGY boss. But I have now done a 600-word historical column for so long. I have a certain feel for it,
Sure.
how it should be,
Yeah.
and things you want to do,
Yeah.
little twists and turns, and it's got to be absolutely perfect.
Sure.
And
How close do you come to the 600 words each time?
every week.
Yeah. Isn't
I'm
it
600
something?
words.
Yeah.
And that came from another boss. It's a newspaper boss, Irv Dean, who was unfortunately passed away. But he was my editor for most of the years I was at the Gazette. And I had several versions, or I did several versions of the column.
Okay.
But it was always around 600 words. So when we were making the final deal for the column that was going to run Saturdays we get the run of the paper, which has also been important to me. It doesn't run just up in they used to do an Amsterdam edition,
Right.
or a Montgomery County edition. But
Right.
now my column, even though it's always about Amsterdam or maybe Fort Plain, they run it throughout it's in the paper.
The whole run, yeah.
And so we're closing the deal, and I said to Irv, and about 600 words? He said, yeah, 600 words. I said, like 600 to 610, 600 words. So from that moment on,
Yeah.
that's the last thing I do. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
we haven't made the donuts until we've got this at 600 words.
There you go. I remember taking broadcast journalism classes in college, and learning about some of the words that are unnecessary in a sentence. We often do it when we're talking, and we think we have to do it when we're writing. And so I was able to go back through news stories, and of course with help from my professor, who would say, you don't need this word, you don't need this word, and all of a sudden you've got room for another whole story, because you're editing yourself as you go along. So it's a nice trick to know.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, but you weren't off radio forever.
No. At some point, toward the end of the 1900s,
What does that make us sound old?
my family members started to pass away. First your parents, then my sister, and then my wife. And at the time, my real paying job was I had got a public relations position at State University of New York at the system.
Mm-hmm.
I almost, it's a confusing system, but
Okay.
I worked for the State University of New York.
Okay.
The whole Megillah, if you will.
All right.
I didn't work for the campus at Albany,
Mm-hmm.
even though I worked in Albany.
Okay. But
And
it
I
was for
worked
the
in
whole system.
In the former D&H building, beautiful
Oh,
building.
yeah. Oh, what a great building to be
Yeah,
in.
and we were on the ninth. Most of the years I was there like 8 years at SUNY. We were on the 9th floor of the middle tower.
Okay.
So I had a great view of downtown Albany.
Sure.
I could see whoever was governor's second floor office.
When the lights were on and off.
Right.
Yeah, right.
I wonder what they're doing and so on.
And you could see the weather coming because you're facing west.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so it was in many ways a great job.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I liked it, and I liked being there. I guess, but I learned by then was how to be charming at work,
Okay.
or something like that. I was a favorite of the union workers. Like the females and the males who, 'cause I was seen as sort of like the class clown.
Okay.
I did parody songs and for parties and this and that. Plus, I did what I had to do. Which
Sure.
sometimes we say lie to the press.
Oh, okay.
Well, we didn't really, but
No.
anyway, it's a high pressure kind of job.
Sure.
So anyway, after my wife passed away, I thought, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. I'd rather be back in radio.
Sure.
So I think they were shocked. I gave my notice.
Wow.
I'm going to leave.
Wow.
Okay.
Now, and this was without anything lined up at the point, or at that point? Yeah.
Because I figured I could probably get by,
Sure.
without any more. And this keeps getting so involved. I always had another side hustle.
Right.
I taught at the College of St. Rose.
That's right. Yeah.
I taught Introduction to Mass Media, which I'd be unable to teach today.
Today, yeah. Well, you and me both.
No
Yeah,
idea.
Yeah.
But back when they used to do stories about the history of newspapers and magazines,
Yeah.
that was me.
Wow.
So anyway, so I did that, and they paid a good little side job, but my main position was working in public relations for the State University of New York. And I said, no, I don't think I want to do that anymore. And one of the politicians I can't remember if he's still in the news now or alas may have passed on, but that was Carl McCall.
Oh, I remember the name. Yeah.
Carl McCall was state controller, and then he was head of the SUNY Board of Trustees.
Okay.
He and Andrew had some difficulties. I don't know what they were, but it's back then, because I just learned recently from the news that apparently they stopped doing this, but then the new governor of New York, Kathy Hochul's, reinstituted it. But anyway, to get to the point, at some point, Carl McCall convinced state government that SUNY, or maybe the whole state government, like it must have been the whole state government, should get 5-year vesting in your pension, in other words.
Yeah.
See, the thing was, I'd been at SUNY for 8 years,
Okay.
and I had built up sort of a mythical pot of money is for my pension, but I couldn't get it because you had to be there 10 years.
Oh, boy.
But Carl McCall changed it so it was 5 years. And I'd see Mr. McCall at some SUNY functions because his wife was, I believe, the president of Fashion Institute of Technology in the city.
FIT, yeah.
So I just at one of the parties, just to, again, my goofy persona at SUNY, went up to him, Commissioner McCall, yes, I wanted to thank you for 5-year vesting. He pointed at me and he said, we had you in mind.
Nice.
So I retired.
Nice.
And I'm still being paid a pension by the
Nice.
State University.
Yeah.
And I started working at little radio stations again. It was like I was back as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for this, well, in fact, I was on 1240 AM.
Oh, there you go, where I started my career. Yeah.
And we were doing a talk format, but gearing it towards Schenectady.
Sure.
Seemed like fun, but we really made no impact.
Yeah.
And then I started doing part-time work at my old stomping grounds, WCSS,
Crazy.
in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, or at some point, a new owner came to Amsterdam, Ken Rozier, who owns a bunch of stations in Utica. It's a successful broadcaster kind of guy, kind of like a Phil Spencer again.
Yeah.
So he came in and he bought the other station in Amsterdam.
Okay.
It was on the AM, and he made it WVTL, and eventually we got an FM translator, a little FM signal.
Good morning, WVTL.
Hi, good morning. I have a question for today. I just wonder if that SWAT team that came in that house and shot that dog, that apparently didn't attack them, that was afraid and went in the bathroom, if the Buster's Law is going to go back on the person who shot that dog.
Well, probably not, that'd be my hunch, but I think you're making a good point. This was an incident in Schenectady
yes,
last
that
week.
was the incident in Schenectady.
Yeah.
I think that's a tragedy, and I think that should be checked into, and that sergeant or chief or whatever should be checking into that. That's a terrible, terrible loss. An animal is just like a child to somebody.
I started working for them in 2004.
Okay.
And I've got a sort of a thing for round numbers. I worked there from 2004 to 2014.
Good.
But once again, I walked away from it. Mainly because of the weather.
Yeah. We talked about this when you did it. You said getting there from Scotia to Amsterdam in the wintertime, in the morning before the plows are out. Sometimes you don't need to be doing that.
Don't need to be doing that.
No.
So I stopped doing it. But after, when we did that, there was more reward doing that show than the show up on 1240. It seemed to make a difference in the community. We never showed up in the ratings, or maybe once, or twice. But we did all sorts of things, political debates.
Yeah.
And I did a morning news show, and for a while the station was talk, but then they went to different kinds of music, which I preferred, because I'd rather, again, this maybe took me back to my WGY days when they were like a full service station.
Right.
So I could play at WVTL 4 records an hour.
Okay.
Which doesn't sound like a ton.
Yeah, but it's enough of a break to, yeah.
It gives you the time to think about what you're going to say next.
Exactly. Yeah.
What you're going to do next. So then 2014, that was that. And then before I left there, I had started doing, I didn't call it a podcast. I started doing an hour of the show about history called The Historians.
Mm-hmm.
And
turned it into a podcast.
Yes, we did. We turned it into a podcast.
About the only thing we've missed is how you and I think, first connected, and that's when I was working for WMHT, the PBS TV station, and you started working with Steve Dunn on some documentaries about the area history.
Yes.
How'd that come about?
There was a manager, I don't know if he was there in your time, named Don Rogeson.
I remember the name, yes.
And I was, we're talking the late 90s, I think.
Yes, sounds about right.
And he, I had done something or other that he'd heard of, and it came to him that I was sort of this Amsterdam lad.
Yeah.
That knew Amsterdam.
Inside and out.
But anyway, and he said, we'd like to do one of our documentaries about Amsterdam. So he assigned Steve Dunn to be the producer, and I was going to be co-producer. I was co-producer.
Okay.
And we did it, and it was a great success. I think Steve and I did not get along at first. As time went on, we, warmed up to each other more. I mean, I think, to me, he was just like from another planet. I mean, what are you talking about, Steve? He was so particular.
Yeah.
Like we'd go out and he said, well, this afternoon we're going to shoot that street signs. Okay. Not figuring half an hour tops.
Yeah, right.
We were there for 3 hours shooting the street sign. And what the phrase I came up with to describe the two of us, he was the artist, I was the BS artist.
Okay.
For what we did.
Yeah.
But when we produced the documentary, again, it was a big hit.
Yeah.
Amsterdam loved it. Amsterdam people had not had their story paid attention to in such detail.
Yeah.
We had the union boss on camera, at this burned out carpet mill. We talked to this woman about history who lived a lot of it and knew, a great deal about it. We covered all the festivals, the Puerto Rican one, the Italian one, the Polish one. We interviewed the Polish and Italian radio show hosts. We just had a whole bunch of stuff and a serious side to it. We had a doctorate. She wasn't a candidate. She earned her doctorate in anthropology, who studied the decline of Amsterdam's mills.
Wow. Okay.
So on. So anyway, so that worked out really well, and we got paid.
All right.
And after that, Steve and I did a couple more documentaries.
Yeah.
We did one called Remembering Downtown, which was about Albany, Schenectady, and Troy.
Yep.
And I still get my hair cut at the Wedgeway Barber Shop, which is in Schenectady.
Wow.
Which is part of that. And I got to meet Richard the Barber, Richard DeCristofaro. And I think I was the voice on another one that Steve did about railroads. I did some shooting with him. I remember going up. I seem to remember little put-downs for people, or the mistakes you make. We were filming. Well, of course, it's by now digital video, but we were filming a railroad, a tourist railroad. It was in North Creek. I don't think it's still there, but so what Steve had arranged is we're going to go in the cab of the engine, and I want you to interview the engineer up there. Okay. Meanwhile, Steve's hanging off the front end of the thing and taking.
He loved to do that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So I said to the engineer, I can't remember what his name was. So, Mr. Jones, thank you very much for this opportunity. I just want to try to get to the bottom of what it's like to drive the train. He said, young man, you don't drive a train.
Right.
You run a train.
There you go.
The tracks tell you to drive the train.
And you learn some stuff when you're, Well, what I liked about Steve is exactly what you pointed out, is that he was meticulous. He was very, very good. I narrated a couple of things that he did.
Yes, you did Flood of Light.
Flood of Light, for WMHT, about replacing the roof on the State Capitol building in Albany. And he really, once again, he's doing some of the videography himself, and he's up on this roof, and they've got him anchored sometimes, but not all the time. I remember him shooting the opening for one of the annual auctions that we used to do on WMHT, and we were doing it from the old Latham Circle Mall, which had expanded. And they got a plane to take him up, a cargo plane, where he was hanging out the back of the cargo, door, and taking shots over top of the mall for the opening. He just loved to do that stuff. He went up in an aerobatics plane. I was in one plane, and he was in another. It was a mirror aerobatics act of Cap 10 airplanes at the air show in Schenectady County one time. And he's in one plane shooting the other plane that I'm in, so that I have the experience and I'm able to talk about it while we're doing it. And just he had no fear for doing stuff like this, and really wanted the detail, and that's what he got. So just great memories of working with folks like Steve and Steve Honeybill and all these other guys that worked.
And I did some other work.
Dave Pavro, by the way, who just celebrated a birthday this week.
And Dave Pavro was always, again, a great guy to work with.
Yes, absolutely.
I remembered him. I mean, with the documentaries, it was just Steve basically I worked with. We had some sort of oversight. But, we were doing this ourselves. But I did some other shows there. I did, filled in mainly on their public affairs show.
Sure. I did some of that early on as well. Yeah.
And that's when I got to know Dave Pavro and Joanne Durfee.
Oh, yes.
She was the last person I worked with there.
Yeah.
She did it. In fact, she did a documentary series called An Age Thing.
Yes, yeah.
As I got older, and I narrated. I think I just narrated that. I don't think we did interviews and so on, or I didn't do them. She had them done herself. So
great folks over there. Yeah, and we had some great time. And you were nice enough when I was running the auction for a few years. You came over and would be an auctioneer, a guest auctioneer, which was awfully nice of you. Yeah. So I think that's where we first met. And then we mentioned very early on, and we'll kind of wrap it up with this perhaps, the Louis lunch. And people are probably saying, "Who the hell was Louis?" And but we really should give him his due. So tell us how the Louis lunch started and how it continues to this day.
Well, Louis Correa was an engineer, a radio engineer at WGY, and at some point got laid off.
Okay,
and he was very sad about it. He'd been there not his whole career. I think he'd worked at WROW as an engineer. But he was one of those engineers who started as a studio engineer.
Okay.
So he would put programs together. So he liked programming guys and gals. He enjoyed that. And he was very witty.
Okay.
Well, anyway, so he's let go, and he was also very proud, so he wasn't interested in going to lunches that existed already for former employees and so forth. So I said, "Would you go out to lunch with me?" Yeah. So we started going out to lunch.
Okay.
And
wasn't the rule that in order to join this lunch? Yeah.
Then Jim Leonard lost his job at WGY.
Yeah.
So we added Jim to the mix.
Okay.
So it was Jim Leonard, Louis Correa, and me. And the criterion was you either worked for WGY or been fired by WGY.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
To attend Louis lunch.
Yeah.
And that's how it was for some years.
Sure.
Yeah. Eventually we changed, and we probably changed when my friend Jack Keenan came on board.
Yes.
Jack was a banker in Albany, long past, but he had done the Christmas show and old-time radio shows
on
at
WGY. Yeah.
And he just loved radio people and TV people and media folk.
Yep.
That's the kind of PR guy he was.
Yep.
So he added a lot to the lunch in terms of like a Rolodex.
Yeah, he kept quite a list.
He called people and
former radio and then eventually TV people were, in the mix as well, which is what it is today. Kind of a nice combination.
And then you came along, and eventually you took over that.
Well,
role.
when we lost Jack,
we lost Jack.
We lost Jack a few years back, and I was having fun at these lunches. He originally invited me to one, and all of a sudden I'm rubbing shoulders with Ralph Vardigan, who I grew up watching on TV, and and people like that, folks that I had worked with early in radio were at this lunch. And so I was enjoying myself. That when he got sick and couldn't do it anymore, I just kind of stepped in. You and I kind of both did. You had some numbers and names, and I had some.
But now I'm going in that direction too. So It's up to you.
Aren't we all?
Up to you, Warren.
Well, I enjoy it. And this is kind of an outgrowth of that. I figured, well, I know all these guys. And there's, I mean, it's not an unlimited amount, but we have anywhere from a dozen to maybe 20 people, that come. I think we're up to like 35 or 40 people on the list.
Wow.
And, so not everybody can join us. Some are still working. Some, can't get away at lunchtime. But it's a good list, and we still have a nice core of people that get together. And I thought, well, I know all these people. I need to be doing something around the house because my wife just keeps finding things for me to do.
That's right.
So what if I start doing this monthly podcast? And you, sir, have helped me finish my first year. You are the 12th interview.
Number 12?
Number 12. So everything happens for a reason. I had a late mother-in-law that used that phrase a lot. Everything happens for a reason. The reason that I accidentally erased you 2 months ago was so you could be the final one of my first year of our podcast.
Well, it's been an honor.
Well, the honor's mine, believe me, Bob. I listened to you for years, got a chance to work with you. I enjoyed lunching with you and such. And so I'm just thrilled that you found some time and the effort, as I say, to get up the 6 steps to the radio split ranch.
It was an effort.
It was an effort. I'll help you get down, and we'll be just fine, and we'll hopefully see you soon at a lunch.
All right. Good luck to you.
Well, thank you, and the same to you. Good health.
Radio Split Ranch.
I've got to be one of the luckiest guys ever to be on the radio. Not only did I work with some terrific professionals in my 50-plus years on the air, but in my later years, I've become friends with icons who couldn't be nicer to share their stories here on the Radio Split Ranch. And oh, the places they have been. If you're a regular listener, you know we're keeping a running tally of the radio stations all my guests worked for in their careers over the years. Bob tells me the total number of call letters he's been associated with adds up to 16. So that brings our first year running total to 136 different radio stations worked at by the 12 folks that I've interviewed so far. By the way, if you'd like to be added to my list of nice people, it's easy. Just go to Amazon.com and order my radio memoir, I'll Have to Ask My Mom, either in print or audiobook through Audible. But if you can't wait for delivery, here's some instant gratification for you. Yes? Another air check from the Chris Warren Library, sure to have you saying, haven't I been tortured enough by this guy? This one's for fellow Beatles fans who may remember what we did on 98.3 WTRY back on the 40th anniversary of the British invasion in February of 2004. Hope you enjoyed the memories, and will join us again next month for more from the Radio Split Ranch. In the meantime, don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened.
Chris Warren.
Good morning. It's a Beatles invasion weekend on 98.3 WTRY. Are you as psyched as I am? We've got 10 Beatles favorites back-to-back we're playing right now. Coming up, there's a place, Kansas City. Here's the song I used to sing to my kids in the bathtub.
98.3 WTRY, right at Albany. That's not very long, did it?
40 years of Beatles music is worth celebrating.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's a WTRY Beatles Invasion Weekend.
It's getting better all the time.
On the super hits of the 60s and 70s. 98.3 WTRY.
I'm a loser. 98.3, 10 songs in a row. WTRY. So long, the super hit station.
Good morning, I'm Chris. We'll be back to the Beatles momentarily. Want to remind you that you can dance off the winter blues and have a chance to win a trip to Aruba, where happiness lives. Just keep listening to win your exclusive invitation to the WTRY Cabin Fever Beach Party coming up February 27th at Clifton Park at the Comfort Suites. We're going to dance all night long with the WTRY crew, enjoy great food from Pan's Restaurant and Catering, and you'll have a chance to win 6 days in Aruba. Stay tuned for your chance to win, of course, on the air, but you can also sign up to win your invitation to the WTRY Cabin Fever Beach Party at WTRY.com.
98.3 WTRY. There's a place. There's a place. There's a place.
celebrating with back-to-back Beatles all weekend long. It's the WTRY Beatles Invasion Weekend on 98.3.
WTRY.
98.3 WTRY Beatle Invasion Weekend underway with Chris Warren. And next up is the first song Paul remembers writing the words to first. He always wrote the melodies and added the words later, but this one came the other way around. It's also the first song the Beatles performed on an historic Sunday night 40 years ago this evening when Ed Sullivan introduced them to 74 million Americans watching Coast to Coast on CBS.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. I will say to you.
Confusion here.
Well, we feel flattered. I mean, if the screaming fans weren't there, then we wouldn't be here, would we?
You're listening to the WTRY Beatles Invasion Weekend on 98.3 WTRY.
60s and 70s, super hits. 98.3 WTRY. Oh, she's sweet, she's
Super hits of the 60s and 70s, 98.3 WTRY, real early Beatles. There's Ain't She Sweet. Before that, You're 16 from Ringo. That was number one 30 years ago last week on the charts. We've got more Beatles Invasion music coming up for you, and of course solo hits from all the Beatles. Stick around for that. I'm Chris Warren. Please allow me to apologize. I had a wardrobe malfunction this morning, and that's why I'm doing my show topless. These things happen, you know. They just happen. Stick around. More Beatles Invasion fun coming up, including Fool on the Hill next.
Once again,
I'm Fox 23 meteorologist Noah Francis.
Chris Warren.
It's 34.
98.3 WTRY.
Super hits of the 60s and 70s, 98.3 WTRY Beatles Invasion Weekend with Paul talking about their first trip to the USA.
There were millions of kids at the airport, which nobody expected. And we heard about it mid-air, as I recall, you know, because there were journalists on the plane, and the pilot could ring ahead. And he said, oh, tell the boys there's a big crowd waiting for them there. So we went, wow, God, you know, and really made it.
60s and 70s, back to back.
Here come the hits.
98.3 WTRY.
I write this letter, I love you. 98.3 WTRY. Joan was quizzical.
Celebrating the 40-year anniversary of the Beatles Invasion of America. You're hearing nothing but the Beatles all weekend long. 98.3
WTRY. Wait, oh yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait a minute, wait a minute. Oh yeah, you gotta wait a minute, oh yeah.
98.3
Really upbeat music.
Oh, it's fun to listen to.
WTRY.
Penny Lane, there is a barber showing photographs.
Playing the super hits of the 60s and 70s, 98.3 WTRY. Penny Lane, the Beatles on a Beatles Invasion Weekend 40 years ago tonight. Do you believe that? By the way, Penny Lane, the bank, barber, and the fire station, they're all real locations in Paul's childhood memories of Penny Lane in Liverpool. Only the fire station was about a half mile down the road from the other two places. Yeah. Paul says he still likes the phrase from that song, "It's a clean machine." He just thinks that's stood the test of time. We're going to get back to it. More Beatles Invasion music. Rock and roll music, in fact. Coming up next, that'll kick off 10 in a row. Stick around.
Rock and roll's greatest hit. Mommy love.
Anyone else have a bad case of cabin fever? And a chance to win a trip or two to Aruba, where happiness lives.
98.3 WTRY. Oh, darling. It was 20 years
to raise a smile. It's the WTRY Beatles Invasion Weekend. Back-to-back Beatles on 98.3 WTRY.
98.3 WTRY Beatles Invasion Weekend underway. I'm Chris Warren. Here's one that the wife of the man who introduced Paul McCartney to John Lennon helped Paul write. Jan Vaughn taught French, and she gave Paul the lyrics he needed, and Paul later sent round a check, since he says she virtually co-wrote Michelle.
Michelle.
Beatles Invasion Weekend.
98.3 WTRY. Baby, you're a rich man. Baby, you're a rich man. Baby, you're a rich man too. Baby, you're a super hits. 98.3 WTRY.
Super hits of the 60s and 70s, 98.3 WTRY. And I love her. Oh, man, does that take me back. You too, huh? Yeah, I thought so. Get those tears out of your eyes. Back to the Beatles Invasion Weekend in just a couple of seconds here. I want to remind you the 5th annual Cabin Fever Adirondack Song Fest is tonight at the Galway High School Auditorium. This will break up your weekend nicely and get you out of the house before you lose it. It's starting at 7 o'clock tonight. Singer and songwriters Peggy Lynn and Dan Berggren. Sounds like fun, like for the whole family. Check it out. All right, it's no secret that some songs that we're playing this weekend were written solely by John, some solely by Paul, and of course both of them did some of them together. One of John's early originals, finished before he played it for Paul in the recording studio, is coming up.
Once again, Monday, a mix of sun and clouds, high 34. I'm Fox 23 meteorologist Noah Francis.
It's 34.
98.3 WTRY.
Beatles Invasion Weekend underway. John Lennon says he was doing his best Smokey Robinson imitation on this next one. It's a song he wrote solo, playing it for Paul and his mates just before they recorded it in 1963. Here's All I Gotta Do on a Beatles Invasion Weekend.
Super hits of the 60s and 70s. WTRY. Whenever
This is the Capital Region's Super Hit Station. 98.3 WTRY. The super hits of the 60s and 70s.
This is where you hear the four good guy Beatles. This is where you hear the hits played the Beatle way. Stick around all night, hey, stick around all day. For the Beatles sound the best around WMCA. Hey! Beatlemania strikes again.
Celebrating the 40-year anniversary of a Beatles Invasion of America.
We were four relatively sane people, and everybody else was going crackers.
You're hearing nothing but the Beatles all weekend long on 98.3 WTRY.
The long and winding road.
60s and 70s, back to back.
Come to hit.
98.3 WTRY.
I wanna be your lover, baby. I wanna be your man.
Beatles Invasion Weekend, 98.3 WTRY, playing the super hits of the 60s and 70s. You know, two things happened to me when I was about 12 years old. I saw my first radio station, and I heard my first Beatles song. And that combination of events is what led me to my first career in radio when I was 16 years old. It's only taken me 35 years to work my first all Beatles weekend. Thanks for listening. Thank you for being with me every week. I really love doing this, and I hope it shows. I hope you have a good time. Terry O'Donnell keeps the Beatles beat with another 10 in a row coming up next. A cut from yesterday and today to kick it off. And as we say every week at this time, don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. I'm Chris Warren. We'll catch you next Saturday at 10. Have a great week.
98.3 WTRY.